It's really good to see everybody. And I'm very excited to be able to be here to kick off what I hope is the first of many different alumni organization gatherings that we're able to have here at the Center for Civic Education. We're joined here today with folks from around the country. We have folks from the center, folks that are engaged and excited about the work that we get to do. And I think, I want to just open up by noticing and taking note of the fact that we live in a really incredible, interactive, dynamic society. And I think that's one of the things that we all take away from We the People program is the importance of a civic and constitutional education throughout one's life. And whether that is in the K through 12 space, like so many people here have had a chance to engage in, or beyond, I think that's part of what makes this program and this work so exciting. And I think it's one of the reasons why people like yourselves, like Max and Charlie and Savannah and others, are engaged and excited about the way in which we here at the center try to make sure that a civic and constitutional education is available for everybody. So that is part of what we get to do here. It's one of the reasons why I get to spend my days with the brilliant people like Chelsea and Bob and Mia and Mark and others who get to actually do the real work. I just get to be the sitting kind of talking head at the table, and I do enjoy that. But I'm surrounded by an incredible team that does incredible work every single day. It's very exciting to see everybody who's with us. One of the things that we've been doing, and one of the things that I have been excited to do, is to help build community around everybody's experience that they've had within these programs, and that has been an extraordinary thing to do, and an extraordinary thing that folks have been very focused on both achieving and growing. It wouldn't be possible without Juho, who's here with us today, who really does take the lead and make things happen. And so with that, I'm very excited to have a chance to turn things over to Roosevelt. One of the things that I've found really fascinating about the work we do here at the center is I get to see familiar faces that I never really anticipated I get to see in this particular role. And I've known Roosevelt probably for close to 20 years. And it is just by chance we have so many people that have affiliations with Columbia here today, I promise. But Roosevelt is an incredible scholar. His first, but he just published an incredible book. I highly suggest that folks get a copy of it. It's very exciting to have him here with us today. And I'm excited for him to be the kickoff for what I hope is a refreshing and insightful hour that we get to spend together. So with that, Roosevelt, as I promised, I was going to give you extra time, so take it away. And it's just great to see everybody here.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that generous introduction. It is really a pleasure to connect. This is now the second time that I participate through Zoom in one of the center's activities, and even from the first time, it quickly began to feel like being among friends. I've known Chris and I've known Mia for years now. Chris, many more than Mia, but we had kind of fallen out of touch. So it was just such a tremendous pleasure to see that our commitments and the work that is meaningful to us brought us back together. Thank you all for having me here. It's really a privilege to kind of drop in the launching of this network. And as Mia knows, which is why she thought of me for this occasion, civic education is something I believe in so powerfully, something that I think about very seriously as a scholar. Also something that I do as a practitioner, both by teaching undergraduates at Columbia political thought, but also most significantly for me by teaching high school students who are the first in their families who hope to attend college and come from low income families, about the meaning of citizenship and the foundational ideas and debates that undergird our current political life. I want to spend just a few minutes, and maybe at the end we'll have a chance to either take a comment or two or a question or two. But I just want to take a few minutes to put some thoughts before you about this task that we are engaged in and committed to, that we can call civic education. The book that Chris referenced that has just come out is called Rescuing Socrates. And it's a book about liberal education. In some important ways, Socrates is kind of the founding figure of liberal education. And liberal education is something that was started back in ancient Greece. And one way to think about liberal education is about civic education, and I'll unpack that in 1 second. The reason why you can think of liberal education as civic education is precisely because of its origins in 5th century Athens. Um, 5th century Athens, of course, is the model of a democratic endeavor, a democratic project that inspired both Roman Republic and the American Republic. Of course, the American Republic paying special and explicit attention to the Roman and the Athenian precedents. One interesting thing to note is that both of those were slave societies, as was our own. And the idea of liberal education is born in a slave society. And it is born in a slave society as the education that is appropriate for the free individual. That's why it's called liberal. It is education in freedom, education for the free. In Athens, you have a large slave population, a small citizen population. The citizens participated in a direct democracy, unlike ours, right? We have a representative democracy, and technically, we don't have a democracy. Technically, the system of government we have is called a republic, which is a kind of democracy, a mediated democracy, a democracy through representation. So the citizens don't make the laws. The citizens don't vote on on a budget. The citizens don't determine military strategy. The citizens vote representatives who, in turn, pass the laws, debate the laws, etc. In ancient Athens, what you had was a direct democracy. So every single citizen participated in political office. Every citizen voted directly on the adoption of laws. Every citizen was required to hold political office on a rotating basis. Every citizen was directly involved in deciding the military, the international policies, including military strategies in a time of war. There's a long war that Athens fought against Sparta, the Peloponnesian War, a 30-year war, and we have good records of the debates that were had about military strategy with regular citizens taking place. So the question arose in that context of where citizens are directly involved in the governance of the society. What kind of education is appropriate for that individual? That's what liberal education is. It is education that is appropriate, that will equip an individual to take part in the political shaping of our collective destiny. So when we do civic education, we are doing the truest embodiment of liberal education, that is equipping an individual to fully participate as an agent in the shaping of our political destiny, which is the shaping of our national destiny, which is the shaping of our destiny. Now, what kind of teaching, what kind of education would be appropriate for that kind of training? Well, certainly you need to know something about the economy, and you need to know something about history, and you need to know something about ethics, and you need to know something about law, and you need to know something about philosophy, and you certainly need to know about science, and you need to know about technology. In fact, there is no area of human endeavor that is not encompassed in what we think about when we think about civic citizenship, about citizenship and civic education and liberal education. That's why we're engaged in this project of civic education, whether you're a math teacher or a social studies teacher, because what we are doing is equipping students with the entire range of knowledge, skills, attitudes, dispositions that will enable them to live full lives of civic engagement, full life of participatory self-governance. Having said that, I want to kind of bring us to thinking about our present moment. And I want to put two quotes here in the chat to frame the few things I want to say. because we are living in a moment of civic crisis. We are living in a moment of a crisis of value. We are experiencing not only historic degrees of political polarization, but we are experiencing something that is even deadlier than the polarization per se. We have experienced other periods of deep polarization in the in our politics. I mean, the greatest one, of course, spilled into a shooting war. It's the Civil War, right? There was a profound polarization and ultimate breakdown of the ability to talk across differences. So we just started shooting each other, so the polarization, even though it's a historic intensity, is not unique. There is something else that is unique, and that is especially dangerous, which is that we have lost the capacity to agree on what is truth. That is the premises and the basis upon which we could resolve conflict, negotiate conflict, work through the problems of self-governance are being hollowed out from under us. There are in our electorate there's a large part of the electorate that has simply sealed themselves off from rational, evidence-based distinction between what is and what between propaganda and information, and that is a failure at the national level of civic education. Right? We have not educated, and I mean here as a nation, we have not educated our population to be able to metabolize and digest the storm of information and disinformation to which we have been subjected. That is, we live in a discursive environment that has thrown civic challenges before us that we have not been able to meet. It's like the foundations of the discursive strength of our social fabric has been tested and found wanting. That is the moment where we are. That is the place where we are. I am an optimist, and I have great faith in our capacity to learn, to adapt, and to adjust. I mean, America has been one long experiment of facing unprecedented challenges and finding ways, creative ways to adapt. So I believe that we will find ways to adapt and to get back to a healthier political discourse. Whatever way that is that we find, it is going to depend absolutely on a revitalized project of civic education, which is why the work of the center, I think it's not only dear to me, but I think it's so absolutely critical. It's kind of the connective tissue and discursive infrastructure that allow for politics and to happen, which means that allows for freedom to happen. So the two quotes I put on the on the chat is the first one is: a cure for the ills of democracy is more democracy. This is from Jane Addams' Democracy and Social Ethics. I think when we see that parts of our electorate, active parts who go out and vote, seem to be unable to distinguish propaganda from information, to distinguish truth from conspiracy theory. It can be disheartening. We can say, really, what democracy? We should disenfranchise those people, or we should somehow curb our democratic process. We should somehow protect the liberal values that sustain democracy from internal democratic pressures. And it's what I love about that quote, that the cure for our democratic ills is more democracy. And there are, again, strong portions of the society that are becoming less democratic, that are becoming more authoritarian, that are becoming more illiberal. Those are not going to cure our problems. Our problems are going to be cured. These problems of democracy are going to be cured with more democracy. And the second quote there is from Reinhold Niebuhr. Democracy is a method of finding proximate solutions for insoluble problems. I love that because it points to a couple of things. One is that we are not going to solve all the problems. We are not going to achieve the perfect society where every individual is free of, racist prejudice and of rapacious greed and full of love and brotherhood and just civic duty. No, we're not going to get there, and we don't need to get there. Democracy is a way of coming up with proximate solutions that is working solutions. Democracy is a work in progress always. Democracy is always under construction. That's one of one of the things that quote points to. That there is an ongoing process of achievement, not a process that we're ever finished with. That we've ever, where do you draw the line between individual freedom and collective responsibility? Every act in which we engage in collective responsibility, whether it's raising revenue to fund public schools or to fund defense forces or to provide free legal counsel for those who can't afford it. Every collective act we make comes at the expense of some restriction of individual freedom. Where do we draw the line between our collective action and individual freedom? There is no final answer. Democracy is the constant process of debating, adjusting, and calibrating where we draw that line. And our politics is full of places like that. The other thing about this quote that I like is that if you feel that you have all the ultimate answers, if you feel that you are right, if you are absolutely convinced of the purity and correctness of your position, then you're deluded. Democracy requires a certain kind of cognitive humility, a certain kind of self-questioning and openness, right? So we approach the problems knowing that we will achieve proximate solutions that come from the meeting of opposing viewpoints, rather than with the idea that our goal is going to be to convert everyone to our own point of view. So this virtue of humility is an absolute requirement of democracy. And I want to end my remarks by reading what is one of my favorite quotes in American literature. It's a passage from Frederick Douglass in which he talks about acquiring literacy. In this passage that I'm going to read, kind of a word of warning, the N word is used. It's used in the mouth of a enslaver. I'm not going to say that word because that word has become such a high voltage kind of third rail. Some people find it hurtful, offensive. So in deference to that, I am not going to pronounce that word. I will replace the word in my reading with the word slave. Frederick Douglass is a boy about 8 years old when this happens. He has moved from the plantation where he was born and raised in Maryland to the city, to Baltimore, to live in the household of a man named Thomas Auld and his wife, Sophia Auld, to have a little boy about Douglass's age. And Douglass is brought from the plantation in the country to the city to be a household companion to this little boy. So Douglass writes, very soon after I went to live with Mr. and Mrs. Auld, she very kindly commenced to teach me the ABC. After I had learned this, she assisted me in learning to spell words of 3 or 4 letters. Just at this point in my progress, Mr. Auld found out what was going on and at once forbade Mrs. Auld to instruct me further, telling her, among other things, that it was unlawful as well as unsafe to teach a slave to read. To use his own words further, he said, if you give a slave an inch, he will take an L. And that's a saying that today the equivalent, if you give somebody an inch, they'll take a mile, right? An L, it's like a whole section of a house. You give a slave an inch, he'll take an L. A slave should know nothing but to obey his master, to do as he is told to do. Learning would spoil the best slave in the world. Now, said he, if you teach that slave, speaking of myself, how to read, there will be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. He would at once become unmanageable and of no value to his master. As to himself, it could do him no good, but a great deal of harm. It would make him discontented and unhappy. And Douglas reflects, these words sank deep into my heart, stirred up sentiments within that lay slumbering, and called into existence an entirely new train of thought. It was a new and special revelation, explaining dark and mysterious things with which my youthful understanding had struggled, but struggled in vain. I now understood what had been a most perplexing difficulty, to wit, the white man's power to enslave the black man. He understood where the white man gained this power to enslave the black man. It was a grand achievement, and I prized it highly. From that moment, I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. It was just what I wanted, and I got it at a time when I least expected it. Whilst I was saddened by the thought of losing the aid of my kind mistress, I was gladdened by the invaluable instruction, which by the merest accident I had gained from my master. Though conscious of the difficulty of learning without a teacher, I set out with high hope and a fixed purpose, at whatever cost or of trouble, to learn to read. And boy, did Douglas learn how to read and how to write. That passage just never fails to move me in my deepest core, because it so embodies what we are about, which is giving our students the tools to make them unfit subjects of slavery. As the master says, learning unfits a person to be a slave. Douglas says that he understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. We are equipping our students. Of course, there's no chattel slavery anymore. There's no legal ownership slavery, but there are all kinds of forms of domination, subjugation, exploitation in our society. And we are giving our students the tools to become unenslavable, right? We are forever unfitting them to be slaves. We are fitting them to live civic life, to live the life of freedom.